Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new BookBase interview where today we talk to author Greta Boris. Greta is a USA Today bestselling author who specializes in writing crime thriller novels based in reality and on the paranormal. Her two series, The Mortician Murders and an almost true crime series, have received great reception, including her recent novel, Bob and Weave, which came out around 2 weeks ago. Before we get started, if you'd like to follow Greta on her journey, please check out her website, gretaboris.com, as well as her Instagram, gretboris, her Facebook, greta.boris, for her author account, and her book club Facebook group, Cryptic, starting with the C and ending with a K, Crime Club. And again, all of this will be attached to our description below. But Greta, thank you so much for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I love asking this first question to authors, but what made you want to become a writer and later on an author?
So I was kind of raised in the whole literary biz. My dad was an editor, magazine editor and publisher, and um, so and I was an incredible reader. I was definitely the kid who was under the covers with the flashlight after lights out, devouring Nancy Drews, and I read everything. Um, so then when I actually it started when I was in college. My first job was the one my dad got me, or one of my first jobs, and I was working in advertising and marketing at different magazines, and then eventually I ended up being a production manager for a couple of national magazines. So I got to production manager, like you really are. You're working with the art department, you're working with the writers, you're working with, and seeing the way the whole thing comes together. So learning about the publishing industry. And so then years later, when my kids were starting to leave the nest, I thought about my magazine roots and ended up doing some writing for some different magazines. um, I wrote for my favorite magazine writing story is that I wrote a lot of articles for Zombies magazine, and which may be how I got into the Mortician series. And I loved The Walking Dead at the time, so I was kind of like their Walking Dead girl, and I did a lot of articles on The Walking Dead. Anyway, so after writing magazine articles for quite a while and thinking, I think I went to that because that was, what I knew, but realizing that they're not very scalable, right? Like you read an article, and unless you're syndicated, that article goes to one magazine, it goes to one issue, you get paid for that, and then boom, it's done, and you have to start from scratch. And I thought, I had interviewed a few authors, fiction authors, and I thought, well, maybe I should try that. And that's the long-winded version of your very short question.
No, we love the long answers to the short questions because that is probably one of the most unique stories I've ever heard as to how someone got involved with literature. And I think it's really cool seeing how your family kind of helped you get started, but you were also weaving your own path through your interests. Like, I really think that story with the zombie magazine is really cool because I think magazines I don't know how many people talk about magazines as much as they did back then, but I remember when I was younger, magazines was like the biggest thing. Like I remember there were kid
Yeah.
magazines, there were teen magazines, adult magazines. So I always loved going towards the ones that were catered to my interests, and I was a very big Walking Dead fan as well. So I remember, just always looking into zombies and stuff, and to see how you were also interested in that, but you're also able to weave your path and writing in general with your interests. I think that's really cool because I think that kind of highlights how just because you enjoy things, it doesn't mean that that has to dictate your path and what you want to do. There's always an
Yeah.
opportunity to be able to blend the two. And, I think it's cool how you also interviewed authors. That's what we're doing right now. And the fact that, you're able to talk to authors, I'm sure that also encouraged you to dip your own toes in into this world of just like, hey, I'm going to go out there and just write a story.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads into our second question. In your website, your bio talks about you wanting to know the reason behind the crime, which kind of explains how you're into crime thriller novels. But can you elaborate more on that and how that kind of helped you guide your kind of your compass in terms of your writing?
Sure. One genre that I read a lot is psychological thrillers. And I think the reason that I love them is because they do tend to get more into the why. I mean, whodunits are fun, but they're like puzzles.
Hmm.
And whodunits, they're more contemplative. They're more, you really have to think through them. And like, I know right now there's a big resurgence in horror, and I'm not talking slasher horror. Like, I don't look at that stuff, but thoughtful horror, like you think back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, all of those things are explorations of the human personality, and how does somebody break, and why do they break, and what do they do when they break. And my biological father, who I never knew, he died before I found that side of my family, but it turns out he was a psychoanalyst.
Oh.
And my half sister, who I'm very close to now, but did not grow up with, is a doctor of psychology and sees patients. So I do wonder if there's a little genetic thing in there that I never knew about, right? Like,
Right.
wow, that I'm drawn to this whole thing. So whether I do it humorously through the Mortician series, which is funny, I think it's funny. It makes me laugh. And I've had people say that they laughed out loud in parts of it. But it has that serious bent too.
Right.
Like there's a cult that her arch nemesis, who happens to be the Orange County medical examiner, because of course, for a mortician. And it turns out he's secretly the head of this Lazarite cult. And cults fascinate me for the same reason. It's like, right. why like, you look, when you're on the outside, you look in and you go, how could they be so like taken in by this person, and what does it take anyway? So I could talk about this forever, but I am very fascinated about the whys behind the crimes, and that can get dark, so I do try to protect myself. I have one series that's more serious and one series that's more funny.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me kind of balance the darkness of the whys.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's so many great points that you bring up. And I first want to start this conversation with, this is also in your bio as well. You say, as an optimist, I believe the better we understand what drives us, the better our lives will be. And I think that is a very untouched point when it comes to analyzing horror. I feel like sometimes, and this could be partially due to the stuff that we see in terms of the horror genre, but I do feel like when people see something that's quote unquote horrifying or scary, they think like, oh, why would anybody want to make that? That's not really contributing in any way. That's just here to disturb people. But I liked how in your answer, the why done it, it does a lot more than just scare you. It creates a conversation. It creates questions for you to kind of understand, like, yeah, what you were saying, what breaks a person. And, I think it is important to understand the limiting factors that we have in ourselves, because that also helps us respect those boundaries as well, to make sure that we don't, hurt people the way that these stories take it to a dramatic level, of course. But, I do sense a little bit of a curiosity and a pure intent to kind of understand the human limit. And I really love how you talk about that in your stories as well, because I love psychological horror. I am a big fan of Mike Flanagan, and my favorite TV show of all time, or one of them, is The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. And I don't know if you've seen that. Highly recommend if you haven't. But that was the first example of me realizing that horror isn't just, I'm going to scare you, your adrenaline's gonna go up, I'm gonna put it back down, and it's like a roller coaster. It was instead a conversation of, I love that show because the question that show is all about is, what really is a ghost? And we're used to ghosts being a figment of the paranormal that comes and haunts you. But in that show, there's a quote where I believe one of the characters says, a ghost can be a wish that never happened. A ghost can be a promise that was never achieved. A ghost can be, something that somebody really wanted, but somewhere down the line it got abandoned and it just resonates. A ghost can be it could be family, a memory, or people that were once with you but are no longer standing next to you right now. And that is what I think could be questionably more horrifying than, a grandma chasing you down the street. Like, yeah, of course it's so, of course I would be scary if someone's chasing you with a knife, when you're running away. But I think what's more relatable are the psychological stories where, you see a story where somebody's really hurt by something that's quote unquote a ghost, and then it makes you think about, wow, do I have ghosts in my life? Like, do I have things that still haunt me, even if it's not through a paranormal specter coming through the wall or something. And that was really cool when I read that in your bio, and I think that is such a awesome example of how I think genres are transforming. It's no
Yeah.
longer just one dimensional, like, hey, the whodunits. Like, don't get me wrong, I love a murder mystery too, but like you were saying, it's a puzzle. And once you do the puzzle, like all puzzles, you just put it up on the wall, you say that you did it, and then you move on. But the whodunits are really special because it's kind of like seeing a movie that kind of sticks with you. It leads to a conversation, it leads to recommendations, it leads to so much more that I feel like the genre deserves. And that's why I also agree with you. I'm so happy that, especially with movies like Nosferatu that came out, we're seeing older classics being revamped and getting a
Yeah.
modern take on it. And that's awesome. We love to see that. It's
Yeah.
diversity that we need in this genre.
So I would not call my books horror. I think a true horror fan would be disappointed.
Hmm.
They're definitely more in the mystery thriller category, but um, I, I had a couple of thoughts when you were talking. But the first one is just to say that I personally believe that what people enjoy is something familiar but with a twist.
Hmm.
And often the best way to do that is to kind of layer some. You have your primary genre, which is for the Mortician Murders, I would say the primary genre is a cozy mystery, but then you layer in some different plot points from other genres. And so there's a layered in plot points in that from the horror genre without it being too horrible.
Right, right.
But onto your ghosts, it's so funny that you brought that up. The way that I love those lines from that show, and I actually started it and never got into it for. I think I got distracted by something else, but I'm going to go back to it now. But but the thing with my Mortician series, here's a book cover of my silly girl. What she discovers that she's a hairdresser in the first book, a hairstylist, and she's in the first chapter she's requested to go do the hair and makeup for one of her clients who just died, and so she's got to go to the mortuary and do the hair and makeup, and she's creeped out, but she needs the money, so she goes. And what she discovers, because it's the first time she's ever been around a dead body, and it takes her the full first book to figure out what the heck is going on. Actually, kind of takes the first three books for her. Well, she's constantly discovering more and more. But when she touches the hair of a dead person, she gets their kind of final sensations in life. And then if that person was murdered, they follow her home until she reveals who murdered them. She never sees them, she never hears their voices, not until way, way, way later in the series. And it's sort of an anomaly when she does. But what she gets is sort of invaded by their personality. So it's sort of what we were talking about, like what is a ghost, right? So one of my favorite ghosts is in book I don't know, I think it's in book 5. It's called Buzzcut. And she ends up being haunted by a woman who had been both a kleptomaniac and a hoarder. And it's always a joke that my main character lives in this teeny tiny apartment above somebody's garage. And now all of a sudden she cannot stop stealing things. And her boyfriend is, going into law. He wants to be a detective. And so she's trying to hide it from him because she's stealing things and she knows he would not approve of that. And then because of the hoarder aspect, she can't get rid of it. So her teeny tiny apartment is getting filled up with rotten cabbages and with, like packets of macaroni and cheese and anything that she could steal from these stores. And so it's like she has this added motivation to figure out who murdered this woman because she knows she can't clean her house out until she gets rid of everything. So every ghost that she ends up being haunted by, there's an aspect of she has to discover who they were as part of why they were killed, like really understanding their personality, which she understands way too much, more than she wants to understand because they're so in her life.
Right.
And that's just really a fun exercise as a writer to like delve into the personality and make that person who never appears on the page
Yeah.
visually feel really real,
Right.
both to the characters and to the reader. You know, that you feel by the end of the book that such an empathy and a sympathy for this murder victim, um, who actually never appears on the page. And it's a challenge, but it's a lot of fun.
No, it must be such a rewarding experience when, you feel like you do it right, because it's kind of like Inception. It's like a book about a person that's studying a person. And, there's so many layers that go into that, because, human beings are not one-dimensional characters. Like, they have a lot more than just, what the words they say or their behavior. So to really tap into that ability to challenge yourself and want to flesh out the person that your main protagonist studies before she tries to understand, like, the crime. That's a very my first question was, how do you come up with a concept like that? That sounds so crazy, about somebody that just is a hairstylist. One of their clients goes, hey, like, can you do my hair and makeup, like, I'm dead, she needs the money. And then touching her hair, she goes back to this ability to kind of understand their last sensations in life. Like, was that something that you always thought about, or was that something that you got while you were getting your hair done? I don't know, that sounds crazy.
Yeah, it had a pathway.
Mm.
So my first series, the Almost True Crime series, was it's been a repackaged. It used to be called The Seven Deadly Sins. All seven were published. We saw some problems with that series, took it off the market. I redid it with my publisher. That's a whole nother story. But one of the problems we saw with that series was that mystery thriller readers like there to be a common character in every book. They get attached to the character and they follow that character through,
Mm-hmm.
all the way from Agatha Christie's Miss Marple and Poirot to, more modern examples that I can't think of one right now because I'm trying, but anyway, I read them, all of them. So
Right,
people
right.
get, that Vera Wang, I love those Vera Wang books. Vera Wang's advice for catching a murderer or whatever. They're really cute. Anyway, so people get attached to a character and then they'll keep reading all your books. And obviously, if you want to sell books, you want them to keep reading all your books.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have that in the Almost True Crime series. And I kept thinking that's because as a writer, in my mind, I had not come up with a character that I thought was interesting enough to write a whole bunch of books with this person at the center of. And I wanted a really interesting character. I knew I wasn't going to write a police procedural because I know a lot of cops and retired police detectives and stuff, and that's a world you can really get wrong if you didn't live in that world, and or you got to do a whole lot of research. And I like to write faster than that.
Right.
I mean, I do research, but not the kind where I'm turning my pages over to a law enforcement professional and having them come back and go, nope, you got this, and this wrong. You got to rewrite these. I'm like, ugh, really. So, and there's so many of them. So I knew I wanted to write something that was, this is my favorite kind of books, are Joe Blow average or Jane Blow average, who runs into some like really scary thing or really weird thing and then has to figure it out. So that's the kind I like. But I kept thinking, well, what kind of person runs into dead bodies on a regular basis? Like, how could that be in any way realistic?
Right.
Right. And if it's a coroner, well, sure, but they're like police detectives. I mean, they're all part of law enforcement. And there's a lot of coroner books. I'm like, oh, good coroner. And then, of course, you could have medical people. There's a lot of medical thrillers. But then I thought, well, morticians, there's not a lot of mortician books out there. There are some series, but there's not a lot. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. But then how would a mortician know that this person who has already been cleared by the medical people and or cops as this is a natural death, how would they know that it wasn't a natural death? Like, what would clue them in? So I mean, this is a year's worth of noodling around in my brain, at least a year.
Yeah.
So I'm noodling around about that. Prior to me deciding the Mortician, my daughter had sent me, she goes, oh, Mom, you need to see this show. It's so funny. On YouTube, there's a show called the Ask a Mortician Show. And she's a real mortician. And it's nonfiction. And her name is Caitlin Dowdy. And she is just funny. Like, she's just got this dark humor. She actually wrote a book that, her memoir that hit the New York Times bestseller list. And it was called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, My Time at a Crematorium. So you can tell her humor is very darkly funny right there.
Right.
So I loved her, and I thought, no, someone based on her would make a fabulous character that could go through a series of books. So she was my inspiration. Caitlin Dowdy, if you're listening, you're my inspiration. And someday I want to meet her. Anyway, but then again, like, I'm back to the mortician thing. How would she know that this body that's been cleared by medical or law enforcement or both, how would she know? So I was actually at the hairdresser, and somehow it got brought up that one of the stylists did mortuary gigs. And I was like, no. And they're like, oh yeah, that's not uncommon. I'm like, no. I thought you had to have some special degree just to be in the room with a dead body. And they're like, no, you're just doing their hair and makeup, and all this. And I thought, okay, that is cool. And that is creepy. And that's a great origin story. By the end of the first book, she's not a hairstylist anymore. She works in the mortuary, and she's in mortuary school. So I thought that's a great origin story. So that was another piece of the puzzle. But then going to how would she know? And I thought, well, I just got to do something supernatural. And since hair is her jam, well, and then I learned, so the first book is called To Die For. The whole mystery revolves around the fact that the night watchman, the hunky night watchman who in Bob and Weave, they're planning their wedding. But in that one, she's sure she's never going to, be interested in him. He's too hunky. But he kind of talks her, because he's in night school, law, to become a detective. And so he's like all about, investigating things. So he talks her into taking a hair sample from this body that seems to be doing really weird things, and she's having weird reactions to see if there is some kind of chemicals that were in this woman's body before she dies. And that was a whole thing I learned about, is that they can do all kinds of toxicology experiments, or what are you gonna call it, testing of hair, because hair, if you took certain drugs, it will keep coming out. It'll be in your hair. And so it just fits so perfectly with the whole idea of it being hair that is the key thing that, both gives her the supernatural impact, but also it works to solve the crime.
Right.
And they do find drugs in this woman's hair that should not have been there, so it leads to them solving the crime. So anyway.
No, thank you so much for sharing all of that, because I am a huge nerd for origin stories and just knowing the minute details of why not only, do authors create the characters they create, but what triggered the process of getting to the point that the person did to start writing the series. And I loved how it started off with all of your inspirations, you watch that show with that mortician, and then you go to the hairstylist, and then you start piecing it together. And I like how you also explain your thinking process really well. I think some people when they're seeing a great idea in front of them, whether it's a movie or a book that they really enjoy. I feel like they can't help but sometimes think like, oh, they must have just gotten all this right, like up front. They must have just
Uh,
gotten a magical, like, thought. But in reality, it's a very big, like weave and flow of, okay, this, I like this, but this isn't working. You spend some more time on it. Okay, I think I have an alternative. Okay, that didn't work. Think a little bit more. You hear somebody down the street say something and you're like, wait a minute, like that actually might work. That's why I really loved your story about you going to the hairdresser, because if you didn't hear that person talk about how some of the hairdressers have gigs in mortuaries and stuff, like I don't know how else you would have thought about that, because that's such a random thought. I'd never thought
yeah.
about that for a second.
No,
So
most of us don't.
right.
And it is funny too, because I have gotten emails from readers that either were in the mortuary business or hairstylists who are like, yes, totally, this is a thing that happens.
Wow.
And they know people, or they've done it, or they've been there, and they're like, yeah, like it. And that's just another thing too. For me, if somebody is writing something that has a paranormal element or a fantastical element or a sci-fi element, if you, in my opinion, if you can couch it
Mm-hmm.
with in some kind of reality, the reader just goes there so much better.
Right.
If it's so bizarrely strange and it's not, you can't relate to any part of it, and no part of it feels real, I'll lose interest in a book. But if you start with something very real, and then you kind of what if that real thing, even if you go into like, well, in real life, obviously nobody gets haunted because they touch a dead person's hair. That's just something I totally made up. But readers, I think a lot of them will go along with that idea because of the reality parts of it.
Right.
You know, so
Absolutely.
I think that that's the blending of reality with a little bit of the unreality thrown in is helps people keep
Yeah.
going forward.
And I think that's why I also liked when you said that you like creating characters that are, I forgot what the term was, Jane below average or something like that is what you were saying, because I think that's what makes it more relatable as well. I think the stories where, the person just comes out with a natural gift and knows it and is able to like use it perfectly, I think kind of takes away the relatable factor when you're a reader.
Yeah.
But I think when it's somebody that is just a regular person, they're just trying to make ends meet, they got a job. Oh, this job requires you to do something a little bit unorthodox. Okay, sure, I need the money. They accidentally end up, realizing that they have something else going on with this. I think that's a lot more relatable as well, because I think that's more in tune with how we live life. It always starts off with just happy little accidents, or maybe even bad ones, where you think you're doing something, next thing you know, in like 5 minutes you're somewhere else and you're like, oh my, like how did this even happen? And
Yeah.
I work at a middle school, so I feel like that happens all the time at my job,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you think that everything's good, and then all of a sudden you hear on the walkie-talkie, hey, we have a student, they're fighting. Okay, let's go. So that's, I totally get that. And I think, again, the way you explained everything and how you came about this series, I think is really inspiring. So thank you for sharing all that. I really enjoyed hearing it.
Oh, sure. In my almost true crime series, that series doesn't. It has a what if, is there a supernatural undertone, but it never is fleshed out. But it's that, like, each book revolves around a crime that is an ordinary person.
Right.
So the first book, this woman is a real estate agent, and she's offered a listing, and it's in Laguna Beach, a cliff house overlooking the ocean. I mean, it's dilapidated, but and if you know anything about Southern California and Laguna Beach, I mean, I just looked at a house that's on the market right now. Um, uh, that is actually the inspiration house for another book in that series, and it's on the market for 30 million. I mean,
Wow.
it's ridiculously expensive. So any real estate agent, I mean, that's a dream listing. It's catapult your career into a whole new category, right?
Right.
So the temptation to take that listing is like, sure. The only problem is that the last agent who listed that place was found murdered, dead, brutally in the upstairs bedroom 3 months before. So she's got this dilemma, and that's how the book starts. It's like, do I take this listing or don't I? And that just jumps in too, like, well, it was because probably somebody she knew who killed her. Probably it wouldn't have anything to do with the house, or and going down that what if path.
Yeah, that just made me stop breathing for a second when you said that the last real estate agent was found dead 3 months. I think if that was me and I heard that, you would have to tell me. If I found out in the moment, I would definitely need to call somebody and say, hey, can you just spend some time with me in this house? I'd be completely creeped out. If it was before, I'm out. There's no way. That's actually really scary. And actually, I'm really happy you bring up that series, because I wanted to ask, what is it like creating a series that has multiple elements to it? I know that for an almost true crime series, it's around 7 books, because it's the 7 deadly sins. And then for this Mortician series, you're touching book 8 that came out a couple weeks ago. What are some things that, maybe noticed when you were writing your first series that better now and you're implementing in your second one? Or what is that like? Because I know that must be its own challenge, always recurring with these elements. Yeah.
So much. So uh, the 7 deadly sins had to be redone because I didn't know what I was doing, right? And one of the things I learned through for one thing, by the time I got to books 5, 6, and 7, they were just so much better than the first books, because you just get better at stuff. Right. But one of the things I learned through that series was that if you're going to write a series of standalone crimes, like, how could I connect them better? Because I was at a book club and they had read book 3, I think, and the title of that one was The Sanctity of Sloth, which was a weird title anyway. But I had to do one for every sin. And they were like, where did you come up with that title? And I said, well, it's one of the 7 deadly sins. And they go, so? I go, this is book 3 in a series. And they're like, it is? Like, they had no idea. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a serious marketing problem.
Right.
So what I came up with to solve that problem was a podcaster. So now each book is a season of this podcaster's podcast.
Got it.
And she, as a investigative journalist, saw a connection between these 7 crimes that nobody else saw, because each crime has a different victim and a different perpetrator. So, but the weird thing is they all take place in about a 20-mile radius, and the victims, most of them know each other. So the victim in book 2 was a character in book 1. The victim in book 3 was a character in book 2. And it's a community of people. So she was seeing the link between the victims, not between the perpetrators. Like, it's common, like, obviously, if you have a serial killer or something like that, you have the same killer, and then, that's how the crimes are connected. But she's trying to figure out, how are these crimes connected when they each have different perpetrators? So that became the new kind of high concept over that series. And so we changed it, and there was other problems with the marketing too. And also I completely rewrote book 1 and a lot of books 2 and 3 because they needed it. But the covers are so cool. I will show you the new covers.
Oh,
they're fun.
That looks
so
awesome.
Each one has that ocean to show Southern California, and then each one takes it's a location.
Got it.
So the first one is the Cliff House. So each one has the location and a different door that represents the location. And I am going to write, I have it mostly plotted, but I just haven't done it yet. Book 8, where my podcaster goes off her podcast and we follow her. It'll probably be back and forth like this. It will have each of these books has like sections where she'll introduce the season, she'll introduce the episode, and then it goes into the story.
Got it.
That's very done in close third person, like you're reading any other mystery thriller story. But she's going to be the main character in her own book by book 8, where she solves a cold case that she experienced from college. And it's kind of complex, but through the process of these podcast seasons that she's been doing, her listeners, she's talked about her own story and her own life, and her listeners have started giving her clues to that cold case. Like, oh, well, I knew somebody that, because now she's broadcasting it over all these people.
Yeah.
So all her listeners are feeding her clues. And so at the very end of the 7th book, they find a body under this bar where her old roommate disappeared. And then the book ends. And so that's going to be the last book that'll wrap up the cold case and explain how all these 7 books are connected.
Oh my gosh.
So your question, I forgot your question, but what I realized is that when you write a series, mm-hmm. it's like one big giant story in a sense. So it's very complicated, and you need to see that a series has an arc as well as every story has an arc.
Right.
So with the Mortician books, I got that. So I ended up writing those kind of in trilogies. So the first 3 is like kind of like her origin, her discovering her gift or whatever, but each book had its own murder mystery that has to be solved while there's this arc. Right. And then the middle 3 books, she learns about her family of origin and where this gift comes from. And then in the final 3 books, she's going to gather her family, gather her team, and they're going to defeat the arch villain who has been in the Lazarites, who's been in all of them. And so when I saw the series arc and the importance of that, then going back and rewriting the 7 Deadly Sins and turning it into the Almost True Crime series, I realized, oh, I need that for this series. Mm-hmm. I need that series arc. I need there to be, yes, you can pick up any book and enjoy that story, that mystery, that crime will be solved. But for readers who want more, and for readers, if you want readers to be drawn along through every book in a series, you kind of got to give that storyline that they just get a little bit of in every book.
Yeah.
And it is a mental, it's mental gymnastics.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. But I think, again, that's just such a great, this is why I think we're living in such a great time when it comes to storytelling, because we are now, I think not only are the readers used to that type of complexity for storytelling, but I think now the people that create stories, there's so many examples and more encouragement to kind of have those layers. I remember I took a communications class in college one time, and they're explaining how I Love Lucy, when the TV show first came out, it was purposely very simple because it was the first time TV was coming out. They wanted something that was relatable, but not something that made them think too much. It was more of like, these are for the people that come home from work, they just want to see something. But then today you look at TV shows, and when people ask, oh, what are some of your favorite TV shows? Some people will say Breaking Bad, some people will say some other shows. And those shows, the reason that people love them, it's not because they're simple. It's because it has the arc. It has the, every episode has its own conflict, but there's also this overarching story where it's like, no, wait, I want to watch the whole season because I want to see what happens with this character over time. And I think the fact that you're trying to capture that with your novels is extraordinary. And I think that's the same magic that people look for in fantasy, I feel like. Like, for example, why do people love Game of Thrones? I'm sure the individual novels themselves are great, but I don't think people will continuously read a whole series because they're just excited for book 4 or they're just excited for one part of it. People really love the overarching story. And I think that's really cool how, you realized that you wanted to build upon that for your Almost True Crime series, which is why you got into the idea of the podcaster, trying to give more context. And I think it'd be really exciting if the 8th book, I know this is, I was just brainstorming while you were explaining it, but I think it'd be creepy if the narrator for the 8th book was somebody else, because the podcaster is the subject this time. And if the 8th book was maybe a detective or something, and he's like, so these are the notes that we saw, and we wanted to share, because I know you guys are big fans of this podcast series, we wanted to share some details. I think that'd be so creepy, because it's wait a minute, where's the lady? She was here the whole time, and then it's because she's the subject this time. She's the person that's solving it. So I think the way you're wrapping this up for your book 8, I think will be a very big home run, and I'm really excited to see what will happen with that. And I'm also really excited to see how you also wrap up the Mortician Murders series, because I know like you released book 8, book 9 will probably be the last book to kind of wrap everything up. So I guess I'm also curious, like, what do you have planned for the future? Because I know like you seem like someone that when they get into a series, you want to flesh it all out. So I'm sure you've dedicated so much time and energy. Like, is the step after this Mortician series to not write for a little bit? Is it to maybe go into another idea that you've been thinking about? Like, what is that like? Like, just thinking about future you.
So, in my mind, when I build a world, because I think that's what a series can do really, really well.
Right.
I mean, you do build a world in a standalone novel, absolutely, but you have so much more opportunity to deepen a world and go into the layers of the world when it's a series, right? And every book should take you deeper and deeper into that world. So, the idea like of never being in the mortician world again, that is too sad because they're my friends.
Yeah.
It's my personal
right.
friends.
I get that. Yeah.
Authors are a little weird. But she has a cousin who's a veterinarian. And this cousin, because she's discovered that this trait that she has has actually come down from their great 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 grandmother who lived in the Middle Ages and was an anchorite, and it's a whole story. And some of her family members have similar gifts. So her cousin, who's a veterinarian, she gets the dreams of the dead when she touches a dog who sniffed a dead body, and it has to do with the incredible sensors in a dog's nose, and then how close together memory and smell are. But the dreams of the dead don't help her really solve any kind of crime because dreams are symbolic, right? So she's got to figure, like, what does this even mean?
Right.
She often doesn't even understand the symbolism of the dream until the crime is solved. And then she's like, oh, that's what that meant. You know what I mean?
Right.
So getting better at that. Anyway, so she plays a pretty large role in several of the Mortician novels, like helping my main character, Imogene, helping her solve a crime. And I think I'm going to do a spin-off with her. She gets married in the second to last book, and her husband is had been a police officer, and now he's a park ranger. And they're going to move up to Big Bear, which is kind of a country area near us. It's on the edge of a national forest, and he's a park ranger there, and she's going to buy some old curmudgeons veterinary practice. And I think it's going to be a lot of like sort of search and rescue kinds of running around in the woods and getting lost, and I don't know, running around in woods is always scary. So I'm going to try a spin-off series with her, at least 3 books, and see how it goes. And then on the psychological suspense side, I've been noodling around with an idea that has something to do with seasons, like a spring, summer, fall, winter. And I think maybe it's a travel writer who, I don't know, I haven't like that. It's in the very raw stages. So anything I tell you will be wrong in 6 months.
Yeah.
Something, I kind of like the whole haunted hotel.
I like that
too. Kind of a thing, but it has to be a little different because there are a lot of series where they have ghost hunters going around. And since it's psychological suspense, she can't really be all paranormal. I always write females because it's easier because I am a female. But so she can't be a ghost hunter. It's probably going to have to be more like a tourism travel writer, travel blogger, going to creepy places because I love creepy places. And creepy things happen. There you go. That's my big idea. Yeah. She goes to creepy places and creepy things happen.
I was actually thinking when you were telling us the veterinarian situation, I was like, oh my god, there's animal ghosts. I never even thought about that. I thought you were thinking,
Yeah.
telling me about like a horse coming through the wall. I'm like, okay, if I was a veterinarian and I hear animal noises while I'm like trying to help an animal, I'm like, do we have any more animals? No, it's actually closing hours. Why? Okay, I'm putting in my 2 weeks. I'm out. I'm gonna find a new
Yeah.
place.
So there's legends about these dogs called psychopops.
Mm.
You could look it up, but Celts and different people in the past believed that there were these dogs that would come and lead um, dead the souls of dead people into the afterworld
Oh
if they were
my.
kind of lost. And so there actually is a psychopomp in book 7. I think it's in book 7. Yeah, Fringe Benefits in the Mortician series. That is it's a cane corso that dies sadly, and its soul is captured by the Lazarites to do nefarious things, and so they're trying to rescue the soul of this cane corso,
Wow.
and anyway, so that dog I think that's ghost dog I think is going to go with her up to Big Bear, but she doesn't know it yet.
Got
So
it.
so
That's
she will have her gift of dreaming the dreams of the dead, but then this cane corso I think is going to start showing up in her dreams or in her mirrors. I don't know, somewhere.
that is so
So
cool. No, that's
that's
awesome. I'm really
that's
excited to hear more about that series as you flesh it out. Because, like you said, in 6 months it could be a different animal. It might be a kin corso. Maybe you do research and you find. Because I've heard the same thing. I believe. I could be wrong, but I've always known for like ancient Egyptian mythology, cats were like their
yeah.
form of guardians for the afterlife. And I know in Indian like religions and stuff, there's a big emphasis on cows and like elephants and other animals as well. So I think there's a lot of when it comes to like animals and the afterlife, like there might be a lot of mythologies that you could probably dip into to kind of see like what
I
that's about.
This conversation is giving me ideas. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so
I'm gonna
cool.
have to dedicate the first book to you.
Oh, you're so kind. Greta, please. I think, I just think me, especially for me, I'm a big series fan. I'm a big loyalist when it comes to like a lot of TV shows. Like if I start the first episode, I try my best to get through it. And so when it comes to novels and stuff, I've always loved talking to people that are behind the scenes and creating these magnificent portraits of like stories. And the way that you've explained everything, I think makes the concept of writing a series, of course it's not easy work, but it makes it more doable because the way that you've talked about your story this whole time, it seems so natural, where it doesn't seem like, you had like a crazy experience that led to you becoming a fantastic writer. It just seemed like you were really passionate and like you just lived your life and you got inspiration from everything around you, and you were just able to kind of put that all together in the way that you wanted to be packaged, and now people enjoy you as a writer because of it. And I think that's such a great success story. I think that should be a story that encourages people to write their own stuff, because I think writing, especially when it comes to series, it's so daunting for some people. Like, oh, where do I start? Where do I start? But it's just always book one. It always starts with the first page and it always starts with the first sentence. And I feel like, if you do want to create a series, as long as you have a vision for the overarching story. I also loved your when you shared that you went back to rewrite books 1 and 2, because I feel like people think that writing is so permanent, where, oh, I can't do anything now. I went so far in, I can't go back. But why not? I mean, it's your story, it's your vision. If you don't feel like it's a part of who you are, if you don't think it's a part of the story you want to share, you have every right to change it. So, I'm
You
so happy.
you you do and you don't. I mean, it depends on how it's published. Like,
Right.
thankfully, my publisher was all about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but there are if you're an independent, like my Mortician series is published independently, so that series I can't. However, I sold the audio rights to that series to Tantor Media. And so now it's like, oh, well, I really can't, because if I did change something,
You have to
like
tell them.
Tantor Media is not going to re-record the audio
Yeah.
rights. So I mean, there is the practicalities. You got to think these things through.
Right.
But you know, you it's like anything else you do. You learn from your mistakes, and so if you blew it and it was sold, the rights in some regards to another publishing company that says no, this it's done. um well, just do a new series and do it better.
Right.
I mean, it's constantly living and learning. But I will say, for newer writers, if they're thinking about writing a series, think about at least 3 books at a time.
Mm.
That would be, because that's what I did not do the first time around. And um but that would be my big advice. Like, think about, like you said, the overarching, the big the bigger story.
Right.
Not just the one book,
Right.
unless that's all you want to write, in which case, great, go for one book, make it great. you
Yeah,
know
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I am actually planning on writing my own stories and stuff. I do want it to be a series. And that's always a constant thing that I have in my head. It's like, I hope I don't forget. And I take notes all the time about things that I write where I'm like, okay, if you're going to add this to the story, this is probably going to be staying with this character. Just make sure it's important. And so, it's really great advice to just hear what you've said and everything. So, thank you for just sharing all of that. And I do have one final question. This is a little bit more of a fun question based on like the conversation we had before we started the interview. But the question is, what do you think is important about the social aspect of reading? And the reason I wanted to ask that is because, BookBase, the reason we were created, or we decided to go with this idea, was because we felt like there's a decline in the idea of socializing around literature. I feel like people, this is also due to the pandemic, of course, but, people we've seen don't really get together as much, talking about books as much as other things. And I know you talked about how you've always been a fan of book clubs and stuff. And I just wanted to ask what your experience has been with either book clubs or just talking to a friend about books or just socializing around novels.
Well, that's a great question. And one thing I will say is that um, books are very different than movies and television in that they're the most personal connection in a lot of ways that you can have, especially with somebody you've never met,
Right.
because their ideas are going directly into your brain, you know, and then your brain is taking those ideas and interpreting them in a way that works with your worldview and how you look at life and all those kinds of things. And there are studies that show that people who read are more empathetic
Mm.
because they allow themselves to think another person's thoughts, you
Wow.
know? And the less that we read, and unfortunately, people are reading less,
Yeah.
statistically, um, often the less empathetic and the less ability they have to look at life through other people's eyes.
Right.
And we can see that in our culture too, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, first of all, reading is hugely social, even if you're doing it by yourself,
Yeah.
because you are connecting brains with somebody else. Then add that layer of talking about the books you read with other people and hearing the things that really resonated with them, which might not be the thing that resonated with you. Or I've even had it happen to me where I'm at a book club that read one of my books, and one of the people will bring something up. And, maybe it's been 3 years, 4 years since I wrote that book. I'm like, that's in the book? I don't even remember it. It's like but that was so important to them.
Right.
And then it's just like hearing. I was at a book club where two women were getting in an argument about my main character. Like, she was a real person. One of them really thought that she was not a nice person and didn't do things very well. And the other one was defending the heck out of her. And I was just sitting there like, this is amazing. It's like, and I think what it does is it those two women, as I'm hearing them arguing about my character, it ends up that they start revealing one of them related to her because she had a similar life experience as the character. The other one did not have a similar life experience. It was a little judgmental. And the one who had the similar life experience won over the judgmental person. And it was just cool to watch. And I think that's what reading can do. I mean, really good television can do it too, but not to the same degree, I
Right.
don't think, as a book. Because with television, you're ingesting what the directors want you to ingest, and pretty much everybody's seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
May have slightly different reactions to it, but they're seeing the same thing. When you read a book, it's amazing how differently
People
people
perceive
come
it,
to
right? Mm-hmm.
perceive the books. And I just think it's really great. Um, and it's a slower entertainment form, which is just better for your brain.
Yeah.
You need some of everything, you know. We're getting so distracted in our culture, in great part because of things like social media, where and I love TikTok. TikTok, don't get me wrong, but it's these so fast, these little
Right.
things coming at you. It's ruining people's attention spans. And you know, literature is long form.
Yeah.
It's going to take you how many hours to read 80,000 words?
Right. Absolutely.
And that's just good for your brain.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's definitely important to just know, like, hey, I can still focus on things. Because I'll admit, I didn't read. After high school, I hated reading. High school literature just completely ruined it for me. So in college, I didn't read at all. And in my master's program, the reason BookBase came about is started off with a book club. I hated reading. My two friends loved reading. I felt left out. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to start reading with you guys. And
social pressure.
yeah. And I remember opening the book and I'm like, I want to go on TikTok. Like, this sucks. Like, I'm 2 pages in and I'm tired. And I had to continuously tell myself, okay, how many more pages are left? 3 pages? You can do it. Just go through it. And now it's easier for me to just not even do that, where I have to look ahead to see if I'm getting to the end. Now it's like, yep, yep, yep. You know, and that muscle needs to be practiced. I think just like anything else, if you really want to improve, and my diction has gone better. I feel like my ability to talk has been, I feel like my vocab, sometimes I'll say a word and my friend will be like, did you mean to say that? I'm like, I did, and I know what it means too. And we'll just start laughing
Love
because
it.
I feel like before I wouldn't talk like that, and it's good, and I think it's a respectable hobby to have or a passion to have when you're reading, because it shows a lot more in that act than I think other acts could carry. Where if you're saying you're a reader, okay, I feel like you have patience, you have, like, you're able to stay through with something, you have focus, it shows, like, like you're willing to read other people's words, like the empathy that you're talking about depending on what their tastes are. And it's just so cool. Like, I definitely agree with you. And that's why the whole mission of BookBase is to promote the social aspect of reading and working with people like yourself and just doing interviews like this. I think we're heading towards, like, a great area where we're able to, like, promote, like, hey, like, I truly believe that the reason people don't read is because they haven't found their book. And I think having interviews like this kind of explores that idea, like, hey, there's different books for different people. And I
Yeah.
just want to say, Greta, thank you so much for being on this interview to just talk to us about your story, the stories you've written, and, just more advice on just what it's like to just be a reader and a writer and just someone that's a fan of literature. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. And it was very fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.